Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our California Brokers Business Accelerator, hosted by our Temecula broker, Michelle Beeson, but as always, featuring a panel of the rest of our brokers, Tom, Jeff, and Steve. Today we're talking about fair housing overviews, but before we get started, I do have a couple announcements to make, and some of these are really exciting announcements because we have some fun events coming up, and some of them, just bear with me. But here we go. So starting today and lasting through the entire month of July, for every agent you refer over, you will earn a free open house sign up to 5 signs. So again, that is starting today, and it will run all the way through July 31st. Just make sure that you remember to speak with any Allison James agent before sending them over to us. Make sure that they are expecting a call from us to tell them more about Allison James. If the agent you refer does join, they actually receive a monthly or yearly residual income as well. That's what you would receive. But what you can do is refer agents to us, and you can receive open house signs, again, up to 5. And yes, they are double-sided because we have gotten questions of that already. Remember to refer an agent to us. Please go to the Allison James University and click on the referrals tab. From there, you will find a form that you can fill out with the agent's information. Next announcement is on September 20th, we will be having a baseball outing in Northern California. Tickets have officially gone on sale as of yesterday. They are $15 each. With these tickets, you do get entrance into the park. You also get a seat to enjoy the game, and you will also get a $20 food and drink voucher to use however you would like. You should have received an email about this, so check your inbox for that. Now, Southern California agents, I know what you're wondering. What about us? Well, don't worry. We do have a fun event coming up in your area as well. What is it? It's going to be a fall festival event. What will we be doing? When is it? And where is it? Well, I'm going to go ahead and keep that a secret for now. We're going to go ahead and send out an announcement on this event in the beginning of July. So make sure you keep an eye on your emails. If you have any questions about the Northern California event or the Southern California event, you can go ahead and email me directly at events@ajicorporate.com. Today's webinar is sponsored by our preferred lender, Movement Mortgage. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our California Brokers Business Accelerator. Remember, if you have any questions during this presentation, you can type them in the chat box on your Zoom control panel, and we will do a Q&A at the end. I will now pass it over to our brokers, starting with Michelle. Good morning, Michelle. Michelle, are you there?
Okay, sorry about that. I could not find the share button. So now I see it. I'm ready to share. Just a minute. Should have done this already, huh? Here we go. Sorry, guys.
Perfect.
First time presenting. Don't know what I'm doing, clearly. Here we go. Okay, so are you guys seeing my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So what I wanted to go over today and touch on today is what you need to know about fair housing laws. There are a lot of laws in place, and the Fair Housing Act is a national act that applies nationwide for all agents. It protects people from discrimination when they're renting or buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. So obviously, it covers the gamut of what we do as real estate agents. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. Now, since we're in California and we know California likes to litigate and have extra laws, we have a more comprehensive fair housing laws that are California specific. You cannot indicate any preference, limitation, or discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, marital status, national origin, ancestry, familial status, source of income, disability, and genetic information or an intention to make that preference, limitation, or discrimination. So you can see California covers much more than federal housing discrimination laws. In addition to the national laws and the state-specific laws, we also have in Article 10 of our Code of Ethics that we shall not deny equal professional services to any person for any reason of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And it also goes a little bit further to say we shall not be parties to any plan to discriminate, which is where our Code of Ethics kind of adds a little bit more to it. So not only can we not advertise it or say it to clients, we also can't be part of a plan to discriminate based on those bases. So what this means for us is that equal housing laws are serious business, and we need to be sure that we fully understand as realtors the laws as they are in place. We need to keep up on any changes in laws and be sure that we are following them. It's very important. We're going to focus on California fair housing, not only because it's what is specific to us in California, but also because it's the most encompassing one. So you can rest assured if you follow California fair housing laws, you've covered the rest of it. So we'll go into the protected classes a little bit more, and then we'll get into the meat of it. But the protected classes, just specifically sexual orientation, the LGBTQ community is protected from housing discrimination in California. Gender identity and gender expression. So California's Gender Non-Discrimination Act, enacted in 2012, protects transgender and gender non-conforming people from housing and employment discrimination. Marital status cannot be considered. Whether you're single, married, or widowed, it's irrelevant, you're protected. Medical conditions, so having any medical condition cannot disqualify you from access to housing in any way. Ancestry, so your family's ancestral roots cannot be considered in the housing process. Source of income, you cannot discriminate or judge about where somebody is getting their money. This applies more if you're a landlord and you're looking at, qualification for a rental. You can't look at the source of income and consider that. And then also age. Anybody over the age of 40 is protected. There is genetic information as well. You cannot discriminate based on information about genetic testing and the genetic tests of an individual family member, as well as information about the manifestation of a disease or disorder in any individual family member. So it's none of your business, basically, is what they're saying. And any arbitrary discrimination. So you can't use information about an individual to discriminate against why you wouldn't sell to them or rent to them. So what we want to give is a few examples here, and it's easy as realtors, I want to add, in casual conversation, especially when you spent a lot of time with a client, you feel very comfortable. Maybe after 4 or 5 outings, you feel extremely comfortable with the client, and it's easy to just say things that might be construed as discrimination. So you need to mind your tongue and pay attention to what you say. A few examples that I put out here is, for one, this house might be a little too much for a single woman to handle. So you might feel really comfortable with your single client, and you might just let that slip out of your mouth while you've just discriminated on the basis of sex. And then the other example, that's a pretty high crime neighborhood. Well, that can be just construed as being racially prejudiced. There's a lot of things that could be construed saying that sort of thing. So you've just discriminated on the basis of race if you say that. This one I know people use. They'll say something like, oh, they want a nice family here. They want, you know, they're really hoping somebody with kids will come here. Well, if you say that to a client, you've just discriminated on the basis of familial status. And then another one, to get to the house, and this is probably a little surprising for people, but if you say something like, to get to the house, turn left on Pine Street. If you pass the church, you've gone too far. You've just mentioned a church. So you've discriminated on the basis of religion. And then another example is, since you're in a wheelchair, you probably won't want the second floor unit. I can show you the ground level unit. Well, in your mind, you could be being very conscientious and acknowledging to them that you understand because they're in a wheelchair, they will probably want a ground floor unit, but you just discriminated on the basis of a disability. So these are just some examples of how, when you're just in casual conversation with a client that you're very comfortable with, you still need to be very careful in the words you use and the way you say things. A couple things that you definitely need to make note of is that crime statistics and details about schools can be interpreted as references to race, which is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. So what's simply stated, an agent cannot discuss crime in neighborhoods. So if a buyer asks you what the crime rate is in the area or what the statistics are, what you should do is direct buyers to somebody who would know, like the police department or other sources of demographic information, you know, or crime rates, anything like that. You should never disclose crime stats or even say a neighborhood is relatively safe place to live, even if you believe it to be true. So it could be your own neighborhood and you say, oh yeah, it's a safe neighborhood. Don't even lock my doors. Well, you've just violated the Fair Housing Act. Also in California, it's important to talk about schools. We all know that most of our schools are overcrowded, and there is no guarantee that homeowners who live within a certain school district will be able to enroll their children in that school. So we all know that we have clients that say, hey, I want to be in this school district or that school district. Well, you can't really tell them that you can guarantee that. You have to explain to them that in California, your children might not get accepted into that school, even if you were focusing on that school district. So remember that guaranteeing a school district is not within your scope of your fiduciary duty to your client, and you could also construe it as a violation of fair housing. So it's important to make that disclosure right away. If somebody wants a certain school district, you need to sit down and explain to them that there's no guarantee that they will get that school district. Just keep in mind that voicing an opinion about a neighborhood, any neighborhood, even if it's the one you live in, even if it's done unconsciously, can violate the law. So, for example, you might say this neighborhood is great for young families. Well, what you've done in that comment is imply that the neighborhood demographic consists of parents and kids. So you've just given a demographic, which is not something that we as agents should be doing. We should not provide demographic information of any sort. Unmarried individuals or older couples might be inclined to pass on this house because they feel the neighborhood doesn't cater to their lifestyle. So if that happened, you would be violating fair housing laws. So again, in conclusion, you just need to know the laws. You can Google them in detail. It's everywhere. You can go on HUD's site. You can read anything about California laws very simply. Make sure you know them and make sure that you are well versed in what you can and cannot say, and that you're practiced at doing that so you don't violate any fair housing laws. And then what we want to talk about too is fair housing rules and advertising. So under the Fair Housing Act, real estate advertising, it's important to know what is considered advertising. So it encompasses more than billboards, commercials, or newspapers and online advertisements. It also includes flyers, brochures, banners, leaflets, your signs, posters, deeds, applications, pictures, and even property-based roommate ads. So pretty much everything can be considered advertising, even things your staff members say or you say verbally or imply to prospective buyers or renters in person, writing, or by phone or by text or by email can be considered advertising. So basically, when you're working in the capacity as a realtor, you could be considered, no matter what happens or what you do or what you put out there, it can be considered advertising. So you need to be mindful of that. So some things to make sure advertising is compliant with fair housing laws by focusing on the property and the amenities in your listing description. Don't focus on neighborhood. Don't focus on things like that. You just want to focus on the property. If you focus on the property and not mention things outside of the specific property, you can rest assured you'll be okay with her fair housing laws for the most part. You should never make statements that exclude persons in protected classes or express a preference for one personal characteristic over others. You always should include the fair housing logo and the equal housing opportunity logo in your advertising. Keep in mind it's not required, but using the logo and statement reflects the management, Alice and James' commitment to fair housing compliance. So it's good to use them in your advertising, the logo. If you feature human models, and this is something that, you know, happened way back when, if you ever have human models in your advertisements, ensure that the images are inclusive and representative of all communities that need access to housing. So you shouldn't have one specific race dominate the advertising. That could be construed as violating fair housing laws. You should always give truthful information about the availability, price, amenities, and features of a listing. Part of fair housing violations, for an example, that happen is sometimes if somebody's trying to discriminate against a particular race or sexual orientation, they might give differing information about the property to them, like perhaps it's more expensive or anything. So they're not flat out saying they don't want to sell or rent to them, but they're trying to find a way to get them to turn it down. And that's one thing you cannot do. Your advertising goals is to gain important critical exposure to consumers. So maximize your positive outcomes, broaden, don't restrict your market. I'm just going to give a few examples. You can actually Google and find several lists that give examples of acceptable and unacceptable words, and there's even lists of words that you probably should be cautious about using. I'm just going to give you some examples because most of them are pretty common sense. But for example, even though senior housing indicates a discrimination in age, it's okay to use only if the community is in fact a senior community. So you can use senior housing, but you can't say great for senior housing if it's not in a community, if that makes sense. You can name the neighborhood specifically. You can say that the house is private. You can say it's near public transportation. You can say that you accept Section 8. You cannot say that you will not accept Section 8. You can say that you need to verify income, for instance, when you're helping rent out a property, but you cannot state specifically what type of income you'll accept and what you won't. Some unacceptable words, for instance, are able-bodied. Well, that discriminates against disabled people, so obviously that's an unacceptable word. You should not use adult, believe it or not. You should not say this is an adult community or anything like that because you're discriminating, it's age discrimination. You should never reference a particular race, and you should never reference a particular religion. This kind of ties in with the last one where you can't say it's close to, let's just say you say it's close to St. Mary's Catholic Church. Well, you've just violated fair housing laws because you have referenced a particular religion and you've mentioned a church. And these are things that you should not mention. So it's okay to mention that it's by public transportation and things like that, but you cannot specify that it's close to a church or a synagogue or anything like that. And also one of the not advisable words, which I wanted to make sure I added on here, was prestigious, because I know people use it in high-end housing a lot. Prestigious is used a lot, but it's indicating it could be possible race discrimination, and that is not an advisable word. It's not a clear don't use word, but you need to be careful in the way you use that word. So in conclusion, I just want to note that fair housing is more than a list of do's and don'ts, rights and penalties, and mandatory continuing education, because it is part of our mandatory continuing education. As stewards of the right to own, use, and transfer private property, fair housing protects our livelihood and our business as realtors and depends on a free, open market that embraces equal opportunity. So that's the end of my presentation. Does anyone have anything to add?
Excellent presentation, Michelle. Really a lot of good information here. The only thing I wish to add would be, as agents, I know we all try to provide the highest quality of customer service to our clients. A word of caution, do not find yourself in a position where the client is asking you to go to the police department or go to the school district to get information that they would like to have while purchasing or before purchasing the property. The problem with that is if you misinterpret what the police or what the schools are saying to you or any other source, and you pass on that misinformation to the buyer, you're placing yourself in a bad position. Likewise, even if you understand what's being told to you by the police or schools as an example, and you go to your buyer and give them the interpretation, they may misunderstand you. So make sure your client goes, if they have a question regarding crime, if they have a question regarding schools or anything else, make sure your client goes and does the homework on that. Don't get yourself or find yourself in a position where you could get hurt, and I'm talking legally. So please just keep that in mind. Thank you, Michelle. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Something that I would add is, we all tend to think that we're really great communicators and especially writers, but it's really helpful at times to have other people proofread our material. I know over time I've used my wife as a sounding board, as I've been writing text for listings or for advertisements, just to make sure that it says what I think it says, and it can't be interpreted in a different way than what I intend. So having a friend, having another agent, or even having your spouse do a proofread on things that you're about ready to publish, definitely can be helpful. The other part of this is just even to be careful when you're receiving offers from other agents, or you're presenting offers to your sellers, or when your buyers are writing an offer. Don't even bring up the subject, or even consider the subject of any whether or not the other side, whether the seller or the buyer is of a particular group or ethnicity or whatever might be. That's an irrelevant. The fact is they're human beings, and that's all that matters on those. So those are things that even just making the comment of the background of the individuals could be considered as discriminatory. And there's no reason for it, and you need to be careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would just chime in a little bit here and state that I am posting into the comments section the link to the fair housing do's and don'ts from the NAR website at nar.realtor/fair-housing. It's in the link. I wanted to point out that a lot of times people look at the fair housing situation as a negative. We need to, as realtors, let our clients know that we have been the prime mover. The real estate community, the realtor community has been the prime mover in equal housing rights. We have been very, very involved. If you look at the history of it, we're very, very involved. And sometimes you'll have clients who are maybe concerned about this, and maybe they're people of color, or they're elderly, or LGBTQ people who maybe in the past have not been treated fairly. And of course, this is an important thing to be mindful of, that if the opportunity presents itself, you don't want to force the conversation, but if the opportunity presents itself, or you're asked about your positions on that, say, look, we are, as an organization, as a professional organization, we are at the forefront of housing rights, and you're in good hands with me because I believe in this, and I am going to operate from a perspective of fair housing 100%, so much so that I'm part of an advocacy group. Our national association is an advocacy group on your behalf. And I think that might go a long ways in building some bridges with people who may have felt disenfranchised in the past in the housing process. So that's all I've got to add.
That's a great point. I agree with that 100%. And I did just want to add too, that if any of you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We're here to help you and make sure you stay compliant, and just rather than, apologize later, please ask in advance if you have any questions about if something's a possible violation as far as advertising, and also have a good response if you're dealing with perhaps a seller that might say they prefer a certain type of person to be the ones that they accept an offer on. Make sure you have your good answer. Say, well, that's not something that's in my scope. I adhere to fair housing laws, and it's, I cannot discuss that or comment on any of that with you. So there's a few things to add there.
Okay, so it does look like we do have one question. If your listing is on the same street as a church and a buyer asks what the building is, can you not say that it's a church?
That's a good question. Tom, you want to answer that one? I think the problem comes in saying in your advertising, and then they can see it's a church. So
yeah, I would say, as long as the question is being asked of you, you have to state the obvious.
Yeah.
It's a church. You don't have to say the denomination. You don't have to say anything else. Just say, if they say, is that a church? You can say yes. And I think, trying to dance around it is a little bit silly. So, so I would say, in a case where you're being asked, not that you're promoting it or pushing it, but if you're being asked, you can answer the question.
The key on it is not to represent that the church being in the neighborhood as an amenity to the property.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Perfect. All right. Well, it looks like that is the only question we have. Just as Michelle said, if anyone does come up with any questions later, or you're questioning anything, please email your broker. They're always there to help. And as you can tell from our California Business Broker Accelerators, they are very knowledgeable. So thank you everyone for joining us this month. And thank you to all of our California brokers, Tom, Steve, and Jeff, as always, for all of your wonderful insight. And a very special thank you to Michelle for leading today's topic and presentation. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.